All right, Gilbertland, let us continue with Chapter 8 of Jarrett, American Imperialism. We're on Section 3, and we're going to try to cover Sections 3 and 4 with this video. The third section entitled America in the Pacific. Now, again, we have talked about in the previous sections how America acquired some of these lands through the Spanish-American War, and now we're going to take a little bit of time to discuss some of the things that happened after they were acquired by us. Okay, so let us start with the Philippines. Filipinos, as you can well imagine, were greatly disappointed in the fact that the United States Congress decided to annex, to add the Philippines to America, to make it part of America, to make it an American possession, as opposed to what they thought would happen, which would be to grant them their own independence. Now, there was a rebellion. The Filipino rebels fought against us, trying to set up their own government. So they fought against their new colonial rulers, which was, of course, the United States, us. So the Filipinos fought against us, the United States, and they were finally defeated in 1902. Now, this cost a lot of blood. Tens of thousands of people died. The Filipinos were fantastic fighters. They were often outmatched in terms of weaponry, but you could not discount their ability, their will to fight. And so they fought a guerrilla style war against us, and they were largely successful in many ways. Hugely successful, to the tune again of thousands upon thousands and thousands of dead. Mostly Filipinos, true indeed, but they killed an awful lot of us and holding on to it. Once 1902 is over, the rebellion is over, there is relative peace in the Philippines until we return it to them, turn it over to them decades later. But during that period of time, from 1902, when the rebellion ended, until we gave up all claim to the Philippines, there was a relatively peaceful and prosperous relationship between us and the Philippines. Hawaii. Hawaii is a monarchy. The queen of the Hawaiian Islands at this time was Queen Liliuokalani. Queen Lil, often as she's referred to. Now, I don't have a picture on this PowerPoint, but there is a picture of her in another PowerPoint, and I think in the book as well. We'll take a look at that later on. Hawaiian Islands provided a refueling station for American ships. Again, don't have a map here. By now, we've seen a map, and if you haven't seen one, I will show you a map to show you exactly where Hawaii is. But it was a great location. Ships could leave the West Coast, San Francisco, LA, sail to Hawaii, take on supplies, coal, water, food, and then make the travel all the way across to the Pacific, to the Philippines, for example, where they could take on more food, more fuel, and then travel to Japan or to China, or coming eastward, just repeat the process in reverse order. Sail from Japan to the Philippines, take on food, fuel, water, sail to Hawaii, take on the food, the fuel, the water, and then sail on to your final destination. So this was a great situation for us. American settlers, American investors had built sugar and pineapple plantations on Hawaii. Hawaii is well suited for this, and they're making lots of money. Missionaries were also sent to Hawaii to convert the natives to Christianity, and this goes back to the white man's burden that I've mentioned to you previously and mentioned to you in a couple of videos. This comes from a Kipling poem entitled White Man's Burden, in which essentially, and again, this also goes back to the theory of social Darwinism, that certain races are superior genetically, and it was thought that the Caucasian race was superior. And so it was our duty, based on this concept of social Darwinism, the white man's burden, for us to elevate, to civilize non-Caucasians like the islanders in the Pacific. So, all these things are happening. Hawaii has proven to be an excellent area or an excellent place to put a refueling depot. We are making lots of money by growing sugarcane and pineapples on Hawaii. Missionaries are going there, converting the natives to Christianity. The one problem is, however, the Queen Liliuokalani, the ruler, the hereditary queen of the islands, wanted to take the power back from the Americans. She didn't like the American landowners telling her and the Hawaiian people what to do. So, in response to Queen Liliuokalani attempting to retake the power away from the Americans, to essentially kick them off the islands in many cases, in response, American landowners overthrew the Queen in 1893. Sanford B. Doyle, a lawyer, led the provisional government, while that new government under Doyle worked out plans for the United States to eventually annex the islands. Doyle had worked to limit native rights in 1887, and then in 1893 helped overthrow the Queen. So here we have Americans who are heavily involved in Hawaii, had invested a lot of money, a lot of time, and when the government of Hawaii, led by Queen Liliuokalani, did not bow down to them, they overthrew her and kicked her out. Now, here comes a little bit of a problem for the Americans in Hawaii. The president at that time, Grover Cleveland, refused to annex Hawaii because of the planters and the actions they had taken in seizing power. So, what happened? Well, Doyle and the rest of them weren't ready to give up. So Doyle served as Hawaii's president for a number of years. After the outbreak of the Spanish-American War, Congress then voted to annex Hawaii in 1898, around the time the war ends. So we were already attempting to gain an empire through the war. Here we had a Hawaiian island, or series of islands. Hawaii is a series of islands. And so here we already had them under American control to a certain extent, essentially saying, here we are, take us. So we annexed Hawaii in 1898. Dole then served as the governor of Hawaii from 1900 to 1903. Ironically, or maybe not, I'm not really sure, a relative of Doyle created the Dole Pineapple Company, which is still around to this day. Okay, a couple other Pacific islands. Guam. Guam was an important port of call for Spanish ships crossing the Pacific from Mexico to the Philippines. Keep in mind, Mexico had been for a number of years, up until the early 1800s, a possession of Spain. And so Guam was a place that they would stop, again, to take on food and those types of provisions. So as the Spanish ships crossed the Pacific from Mexico to the Philippines, or from the Philippines to Mexico, they would often stop at Guam. In 1898, Guam was taken from Spain by the United States during the Spanish-American War. We've already discussed that. Okay, to this day, it is still a part of the United States. It is what is referred to as an unincorporated territory. Now, we'll go into a little bit more depth in that when we get to the vocabulary terms. But Guam is still part of the United States to this day, and has been since 1898. Samoa and Midway. Okay, Samoa is known for any number of things. There are any number of football players or wrestlers who are from Samoa. For example, The Rock, Dwayne Johnson. His grandfather, who were both wrestlers, are from Samoa. And so that's one of the things that we know about Samoa. Midway, of course, was the site of one of the key battles during World War II, which we'll get to in a couple of chapters. But anyway, other than that, not a lot of people know a whole lot about Samoa and Midway. But Midway becomes an American possession in 1867. I mean, this is long before the Spanish-American War. Keep in mind, in the late 1800s, we had acquired a number of territories around the world. Alaska, for example, Midway in 1867. Long before, again, it states there, long before the Spanish-American War. In 1899, Samoa was divided between Germany and the United States. These Pacific Islands provided valuable naval bases, refueling stations for American ships as they traveled to Asia. Now we're going to take up in the next section the trading with Asia, with Japan and China. But before we do, let's go back and just review real quickly why we wanted possessions. Okay? In order to do that, let me clear this off a little bit because I'm going to write some of this stuff right here. And you probably should write this down somewhere in the margin, because these are the reasons I'm going to give you why we're doing this. I think that's enough room. Okay. There are a number of reasons why we wanted possessions. Number one, raw materials. My handwriting's horrible, and it's even worse doing it like this. So we were looking for raw materials. Now, again, we are a rich nation in raw materials, but it never hurts to have access to more. Number two, markets. We were looking for markets to sell our goods or to buy from them. Yeah, I know that's ugly, but it's a need. Three, military bases. Cuba, Guantanamo Bay, is really at the mouth of the Gulf of Mexico. And a military base there is an excellent first warning system. If any foreign nation tries to come in, they got to go through there, and American ships based out of Guantanamo Bay can see them and put up, act as a first line of defense. So these military bases in the Caribbean are a first line of defense. In the Pacific, Hawaii, Midway, Guam are first lines of defense. Now at home, most of you have fences to keep people out. You have a door. You have a lock on that door. You have a security system. Many of you probably, or your parents have some type of weapon, a gun, a rifle for self-protection. Well, again, that's what these islands did. They provided a front line, a first line of defense in case someone attacks us. And just to make sure you understand that how possible this is, it happened in World War II. The Japanese attacked us at Pearl Harbor, and about 6 months later, tried to seize the island of Midway. If they could have taken the island of Midway, they could have launched an attack against the continental United States in California. So, raw materials, markets for us to buy or to sell to, military bases, and then the last one, the depots, the refueling depot. Now, of course, this kind of goes hand in hand with the military bases, but they can be separate. So those are the reasons why we sought to acquire these territories. All right, let's move on to section 4. Got 2 or 3 slides here and we'll be finished with it. America and East Asia. Geography placed America in a very advantageous position for trade with East India. Okay, we were separated only by the Pacific Ocean. Now, of course, this is kind of funny when you think about it. Only the Pacific Ocean, which is about 3,000 miles wide in some places. But again, there really isn't anything else besides the water. And we were able to overcome those distances by building bigger, better ships that allow us to travel across the Pacific with few problems. Again, you had England, for example. They have to travel all the way across Asia and Europe to get to China or Japan. We didn't have those kinds of problems. So again, America trading with Asia, Japan and China specifically, was a good idea, and it's something that we saw. Clipper ships are very fast sail ships, ships that travel using sails. In fact, clipper ships broke all kinds of records for crossing the Atlantic, the Pacific, all kinds of speed records until we got to faster steam-powered ships. The clipper ships were long, sleek, very fast usually ships that could cross the Pacific in record time, and they did often. These clipper ships brought Chinese tea and other goods to us from East Asia. And once we got used to buying these goods, we wanted more and more. Again, why do we trade? We wanted to sell our goods to those countries, and we wanted to buy their goods. After 1898, which of course is the Spanish-American War, after 1898, control of several Pacific islands, Guam, the Philippines, Midway, Hawaii, for example, gave the United States greater influence in the Pacific. We now control a number of islands in the Pacific. We have military bases there. We have Americans living there. And so we now have more influence in the area than we've ever had before. These acquisitions, these colonial acquisitions, increased our opportunities for trade with both Japan and China. These are, China and Japan, two of the last relatively untapped resources on the planet. All right, let's go to the next slide. Let's take first a look at China. China, the mythical kingdom of Cathay, Marco Polo, the Ming Dynasty, the Great Wall. I mean, these are things that people had heard about, or in some cases read about, for centuries. But it was relatively untapped. Now, in the 1850s, we see European powers, England, France, Germany, Spain, a couple others, establishing what they called spheres of influence. What that basically means is they divided China up, and here's a little bit of a definition. They divided China up, and okay, England has this part, France has that part, Germany has that part, and those spheres of influence were areas where that country had special privileges. Now, did we ask the Chinese? Did the English ask the Chinese? Did the Germans ask the Chinese? No. They just did it. Why? Because they were bigger, stronger, badder, meaner, and the Chinese could not resist them. Now, what's the problem with this? Well, the problem is we, the United States, did not have a sphere of influence over there. We did not have one, and we did not want to get left out of the trade with China. Even though we had, for a long time, carried on trade with China, we were left out when the Europeans divided China up. And so we felt if other nations, again we're talking England, France, Germany, Spain, blah, 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 were permitted, if we allowed them to sort of divide China that way, then we, the United States, would be blocked from future economic activities within China, which could cost us a lot of money. Could cost us access to raw materials and goods from their markets that we wanted. The Secretary of State at that time, a man by the name of John Hay, who was anxious to protect American businessmen and our investors over there. I mean, again, we're talking lots and lots of money. He was worried that if we got shut out of China, then we would lose a lot of money. And again, America's a capitalistic nation. You go into business to make money. And he was worried that the American trade would be shut out of China by those European powers. Now, again, we were emerging as one of the, if not the dominant military power on the planet, but were we strong enough to take on all of Europe? No, we weren't. And so we needed to work with them. Plus, we didn't really want to go to war with Europe. They were our father, our mother, our cousins, our aunts, our uncles. We came from those countries. Many Americans still had family in those countries. We didn't want to go to war with them. Well, we wanted to work out what we thought would be a fair business situation, a fair business solution for us. So Hay and much of the rest of America saw China as a vital market for our new industrial economy. Our economy is growing. We're going through the middle of the Industrial Revolution. We have industrialization, urbanization, immigration. All the things we talked about earlier are happening in the late 1800s. We're producing more and more goods than ever before. We're looking for new markets. China was one of those potential markets. So in 1898, Hay, again, Secretary of State at this time, under William McKinley, announced what he called the open door policy. Okay? The open door policy gave equal trading rights to all foreign nations in China. Basically, those spheres of influence are done away with. We're going to open the door to China, basically allowing any country to trade anywhere in China. Forget these spheres of influence. He then sent notes to every major power and declared the policy to be in effect. Now, this is somewhat arrogant, I got to admit. We're basically saying what you've been doing is wrong, what we want to do is right, and you're going to do it. Now, nothing wrong with that if you can get away with it. And here's the problem. As I told you, we didn't bother asking the Chinese what they felt about this, and they let us know. What we refer to as the Boxer Rebellion, essentially a group of youngsters, teens, 20s, maybe even early 30s, rebelled against European and American influence, rebelled against European and American meddling, I guess you could say, in Chinese affairs, and they started a rebellion. Often armed with nothing more than knives or their own hands, they went up against Western troops. They threatened any foreigners living in China, killed a lot of them. So an international army was created with the United States participating. It was sent to China, and with more modern weaponry than the Chinese Boxers had at their disposal, the Western Army, again, with the United States participating in it, crushed the rebellion. So, the Chinese rebelled in 1900, what we refer to as the Boxer Rebellion. It was relatively quickly crushed by a group of soldiers from different countries, European and American. And hey, at the end of it, announced the United States would oppose any attempt by other nations to use a rebellion as an excuse to dismember, to carve up, to divide China. So, in a sense, we sort of became China's protector. Of course, they never asked us for our protection, but that's what happened. Japan. Now, Japan had been an isolated country for many years, decades, centuries. In fact, if a foreigner landed on Japanese soil prior to the 1850s and was not invited, they would be put to death. To this day, the Japanese refer to foreigners as gaijin, which roughly translates into barbarian. Now, in 1853, and it's something we did not cover this year because this is something you should have covered in the 8th grade, Commodore Matthew Perry sailed a fleet of American gunships to Japan, essentially trained their weapons on the Japanese, said, we want to trade with you, how do you feel about it? And of course the Japanese eventually acquiesced and gave in, and we've been trading with the Japanese fairly successfully since the 1850s. By the 1890s, Japan had adopted many Western ways and become the first Asian industrialized power. You can sort of see this in the Tom Cruise movie, The Last Samurai. There is sort of a war, as one of the samurai mentions, for the soul of Japan. On one hand, you have the old guard, the samurai, who are sworn to protect Japan. On the other hand, you have the new guard, those who want to wear Western clothing, those who want to industrialize, those who wish to adopt Western styles, Western means, Western policies. Japan eventually adopted certain imperialistic policies. Again, they became somewhat of an empire themselves. They defeated China in 1894, which again was not that big a deal. China is a large country, but because that size, they are not unified and they never had much of a military. But what was really surprising, in 1905, the Japanese surprised the West by defeating Russia in what is referred to as a Russo-Japanese War. Now again, this is 50 or so years after we started trading with them. The Japanese, had brought in all kinds of European and Western experts and industry and war. Again, the movie The Last Samurai. And so as they grew in economic strength, they grew in military strength. They defeated the Chinese in 1894. They defeat the Russians in 1905. Now, Teddy Roosevelt, who was president at this time, brought the Japanese and the Chinese together and negotiated a peaceful settlement, which is referred to as the Treaty of Portsmouth, which is in 1905. And for his efforts, Teddy won the Nobel Peace Prize for negotiating an end to the Russo-Japanese War. Now, we're going to stop at this point. We're not going to go into section 5. We're going to end sections 3 and 4. And if you have any questions, I will discuss them and answer them the best I can. Thank you very much.